There's a moment, sitting inside the gardens of Kensington Palace, where Jimin says something that almost slips by unnoticed. It's not a dramatic statement. It's not even framed as a big deal. He's holding a scone, laughing between bites of English tea sandwiches, and he says maybe, just maybe, the concert happening in 2 days could end up being the most memorable day of the entire tour. At the time, it sounds like a throwaway line, a polite answer to a British radio host's question. But if you rewind and watch it again knowing what happened next, that sentence stops sounding casual. It starts sounding like a prophecy. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why ARMY around the world has been replaying this clip on loop for the past 2 weeks. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this channel breaks down the moments inside BTS's world that most people scroll past without realizing what they're actually watching. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we're about to walk through exactly how a quiet afternoon tea in London turned into one of the most talked about full-circle moments of the entire ARIRANG World Tour. So let's set the scene. It's July 2026. BTS, all 7 members, or at least 6 of them, we'll get to that, are in London for the first time in 7 years. This isn't a small thing. The last time these boys stepped foot in the city as a group, it was 2019, and they made history as the first Korean act to ever headline Wembley Stadium. 7 years is a long time. In that gap, there was a global pandemic, there was mandatory military service for every single member, there were solo careers, there was a wall of uncertainty about whether a moment like this would ever happen again. And now, here they are, back on British soil, about to play 2 sold-out nights at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. But before the stadium lights, before the pyrotechnics, before 60,000 people scream every word back at them, Capital Breakfast host Jordan North gets an invitation most journalists would kill for. He's taking BTS to Kensington Palace for what Capital calls a very British day out. Think proper English afternoon tea. Tiered trays of scones, clotted cream, finger sandwiches, the whole works. And sitting around that table are J-Hope, Jungkook, Jimin, Suga, Jin and V. Notice who's missing. RM isn't there. And when Jordan asks where he is, V doesn't miss a beat. He says RM's off taking a nap. Which, if you know anything about this group's group chat energy, is exactly the kind of answer that gets the whole table laughing. It's a small moment, but it tells you everything about the tone of this interview. This isn't a stiff, corporate press junket. These are 6 grown men who've known each other for over a decade, sitting in a palace garden, roasting their missing member, and genuinely enjoying being back in a country that clearly means something to them. Now here's where it gets interesting. As the tea gets poured and the scones get passed around, Jordan starts asking about their history with the UK. And this is where Jimin brings up Wembley. He explains that back in 2019, Bohemian Rhapsody, yes, the Queen classic, was massively popular at the time, and BTS happened to be performing at Wembley during that exact cultural moment. He says it made the whole experience feel even more special, like they were part of something bigger than just their own show. It's a small detail, but it's the kind of detail that shows you how much these performances actually stick with him. He's not just remembering the numbers or the size of the crowd. He's remembering the atmosphere, the cultural texture of that specific night. V jumps in right after with something that ARMY has heard in different forms over the years, but that still hits every time. He says you really have to hear their songs live to actually feel them. Even the exact same song changes depending on the crowd, depending on the energy in the stadium that night. He says they genuinely don't know what's going to happen until they're up there. Which, if you think about it, is kind of the whole magic of a live show. No 2 nights are ever identical. Then Jordan asks the group what part of the new ARIRANG tour they're most excited to perform live. And this is where Jimin says something that, in hindsight, becomes almost eerie. He names Body to Body as one of his favorite moments of the whole set. Jin jumps in and explains why. There's a part in the song where the traditional folk melody, ARIRANG, gets woven directly into the track, and when that happens live, the entire stadium ends up singing along together. Jin calls it one of the most exciting parts of the whole tour. Jungkook, sitting there, says it's just been so long, and that they've missed their fans more than words can really express. And then comes the line. Jordan asks something along the lines of what they think will be the most memorable moment of this UK run. And Jimin, almost casually, says maybe the concert happening in 2 days will end up being the most memorable day of the whole tour. At the time this aired, It read as a nice, hopeful thing to say. The kind of optimistic answer any performer gives before a big show. Nobody watching that interview live had any way of knowing just how literally that sentence was about to come true. Because 2 days later, BTS walked out onto the stage at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium for the first of 2 nights. And what happened over those 2 shows didn't just meet expectations, it broke them. Let's talk numbers first, because they're wild. Across the 2 nights, BTS drew roughly 130,000 fans through Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. According to Live Nation, that made it the largest attendance the stadium had ever recorded for any event since it opened back in 2019. Not just concerts, any event, football matches included. Think about that for a second. A K-pop group, 7 years after their last UK show, didn't just sell out 2 nights, they set an all-time venue record doing it. And the reviews weren't just polite, they were glowing. Rolling Stone UK and The Guardian both handed the show a full 5-star rating, with Rolling Stone UK going as far as calling the concert a coronation. Think about the weight of that word. A coronation isn't just praise for a good show, it's language that frames the night as the crowning of something. As BTS reclaiming a throne they'd left empty for 7 years. The Times, meanwhile, gave it 4 stars and described it as a pleasingly carefree sequel to everything that came before. Even the slightly more reserved review still couldn't help but smile through it. Now here's where Jimin's afternoon tea comments come full circle in a way that genuinely gives you chills if you know where to look. Remember, back at Kensington Palace, Jimin named Body to Body as one of the tour moments he was personally most excited about. Fast forward to the actual concert, and music outlet Clash magazine, covering the London show in detail, singled out that exact same song as the clear highlight of the entire evening. Not Dynamite, not Butter, not even Idol, which is one of the biggest crowd pop moments of any BTS setlist. Body to Body, the song Jimin specifically called out 2 days before it happened. According to the show's coverage, the moment builds through the traditional, ARIRANG, folk melody swelling in the second half of the track, screens filling with dancers dressed in traditional hanbok, flag bearers circling the stage, and then the song bleeding directly into Idol, with the members leaving the stage entirely to walk a full lap through the pit, pulling the entire floor into the performance with them. It's described as the kind of moment that gives you goosebumps live, and Jimin knew it was coming. He told a British radio host about it 2 days in advance, sitting in a palace garden with a scone in his hand, and almost nobody clocked how significant that sentence actually was until the reviews started rolling in. And then there's RM. Even though he wasn't at the afternoon tea, off taking that now legendary nap, he showed up on stage and in his own way, tied the entire London stop back to that same emotional through-line Jimin had already opened up about at Kensington Palace. On night 1, RM told the sweltering, sold-out crowd it had been a while since they'd been back. He also joked about England's football team winning their match the night before, crediting BTS's presence in the city for the good luck, pointing out that Belgium won when they played there, and now England had won too. It's a playful line, but underneath the joke is something real. These members clearly feel connected to the cities they perform in, almost superstitiously so. Then RM got more reflective. He told the crowd that being back gave him a flood of memories from their Wembley performance years earlier, memories of a time before COVID, before military service pulled the group apart for years, before any of them knew if a night like this would ever happen again. And now, in 2026, they were standing there together, in London, with a stadium full of people who never stopped waiting for them. That's the piece that makes Jimin's prediction land so hard in hindsight. He wasn't just guessing that the show would go well. He was tapping into something the entire group seemed to be feeling, that this specific London stop, coming after everything they'd all been through individually, carried more emotional weight than almost any other stop on the tour. And the numbers, the reviews, and RM's own words on stage all ended up backing that up independently, without anyone planning it that way. But the story doesn't stop at attendance numbers and star ratings. Because in the days following those 2 shows, something else happened that made Jimin's offhand prediction look even more accurate than anyone expected. The Guardian's review, the same 5-star review that helped anchor the concert's critical reception, didn't just praise the show as a whole. Buried inside, it was a personal admission from the critic themselves. They wrote that they walked into Tottenham Hotspur Stadium with no particular favorite member. No bias, No built-in loyalty, just a journalist doing their job. But by the time the final song ended, that had changed. The reviewer named Jimin as the member who stood out to them most, going as far as saying the performance left them wanting to learn Korean. Think about what that actually means. This isn't a K-pop outlet or a fan account making that observation. This is a mainstream British broadsheet, reviewing the show with zero prior investment in the group's internal dynamics, and still landing on Jimin as the standout. Fans online picked up on it almost instantly, with a phrase, "The Jimin effect never misses," circulating across social media in the days that followed. It became one of those rare moments where outside, unbiased press coverage ends up validating exactly what ARMY has been saying for years. Billboard added another layer to this. In their own coverage of the London shows, they specifically called out Jimin's hair as one of the best individual moments of the entire concert, describing the way he moved on stage with what they called Samson-like power. It's a small detail on paper, but it's the kind of specific, visual observation that only gets made when someone genuinely can't look away from a performer. And then there's Dazed. Out of an entire 2-night run packed with iconic stage moments, the fashion and culture outlet chose to post exactly one video from the London concert on their official TikTok. And it was a direct fan cam of Jimin performing Body to Body, the same song he named as his personal favorite 2 days earlier, sitting in that palace garden with a cup of tea in his hand. That's 3 separate, independent pieces of mainstream press, The Guardian, Billboard, and Dazed, all converging on the same 2 things Jimin had already flagged before the show even happened. His stage presence became the story critics couldn't stop mentioning, and Body to Body became the single moment culture outlets chose to immortalize. He didn't just predict the night would be memorable. He predicted which parts of it would be. But maybe the clearest sign of all didn't come from critics writing days later. It came from the crowd itself, in real time, while the show was still happening. On the first night, Jimin stepped out wearing a beanie with ear flaps, the same style he'd worn back at the ARIRANG Tour's opening night in Goyang months earlier. It wasn't a major styling moment on paper, just a small callback piece in his overall look. But by the time the concert wrapped that night, that exact beanie had sold out on the official online store. Not the next morning. Not after the reviews came in. While the show was still going. That's the kind of real-time reaction that no publicist can manufacture and no marketing plan can predict. It's just what happens when a crowd is watching someone they can't take their eyes off of. And the story didn't end when the London lights went down either. Just days later, BTS packed up and headed to Munich, where they were set to become the first Korean act to ever perform at Allianz Arena. Another first. Another record on the table. Another city that had never seen anything quite like this before. Which honestly says a lot about where this era of BTS is heading. London wasn't a peak. It was a preview. Social media picked up on all of this in real time, too. Not just after the reviews landed days later. On night 1, Jimin broke into an unplanned freestyle moment during a surprise performance of Dionysus, dancing in that same oversized beanie, and the clip spread across fan accounts within minutes, with people tagging him as the tour's main dancer and vocal powerhouse in the same breath. A surprise rendition of Save Me that same night added to the sense that these 2 London shows were being treated as something outside the group's usual format, looser, more spontaneous, more willing to bend the setlist specifically for this crowd. Then, during the closing comments on night 1, cameras caught something small but sweet. Jimin and Jungkook were seen sitting side by side, clearly deep in a quiet conversation while the rest of the group wrapped up the night, with Jungkook leaning in to whisper something in Jimin's ear. Fans immediately zeroed in on the moment, calling it one of the most talked about candid interactions of the whole European leg. It wasn't planned, it wasn't choreographed, it was just 2 members who've spent over a decade side by side, sharing a private moment in front of 60,000 people who happened to be watching. None of these individual moments are things Jimin could have predicted sitting in that palace garden 2 days earlier. But they all add up to the same underlying pattern. Every layer of that show, the planned parts and the completely spontaneous ones, ended up reinforcing exactly what he said before it even started. That this was going to be a night people wouldn't stop talking about. It's also worth pointing out just how unscripted this all was. Nobody sat Jimin down before that interview and told him what to say. Nobody at Capital Breakfast fed him a line about predicting a record-breaking night. He was just answering a casual question from a radio host over tea in a palace garden, 2 days before a show he genuinely didn't know the outcome of yet. That's what makes it so compelling. It's not manufactured hype. It's a member of the group speaking honestly about how much this particular stop meant to him, and then reality lining up with exactly what he said. If you go back and rewatch the full, very British Day Out video now, knowing what you know, every part of it hits differently. The Wembley story isn't just a fun anecdote anymore, it's the emotional setup for everything that follows. The body-to-body comment isn't just Jimin naming a favorite song, it's him quietly telling the world what the biggest moment of the show was going to be 2 days before the world found out for itself. And that final line about the concert possibly being the most memorable day of the tour isn't just optimism, it's a prediction that a record-breaking, 5-star, coronation-level show ended up proving completely right. There's something genuinely special about watching an idol talk about an upcoming show with that kind of quiet confidence, especially when it's not performative. Jimin wasn't hyping up the crowd or trying to build anticipation for cameras. He was just being honest, in a low-stakes conversation, about how much the specific night mattered to him personally. And when the show delivered exactly what he hoped it would, it turned an ordinary afternoon tea clip into one of the most rewatched interview moments from the entire European leg of the tour. So if you've made it this far, let me know down in the comments. Did you catch this Jimin quote when the interview first came out? Or did it only click for you once the London shows actually happened? I want to know which part surprised you more. The Wembley story, the body-to-body call, or the fact that the prediction lined up this cleanly with what actually went down on stage. If this kind of deep dive into the small moments behind BTS's biggest nights is something you want more of, make sure you're subscribed, because we're going to keep tracking these threads all the way through the rest of the ARIRANG World Tour, Munich, Paris, and everywhere after that. Drop a like if this connected some dots for you, share it with the army in your group chat who definitely needs to see this side by side, and I'll see you in the next one.